Okay, welcome everybody back to the channel with another interesting deck tech. I went and looked at the videos and it looks like everybody really likes Rakdos. Didn't know that was a thing, but apparently people looking for deck strategies on YouTube love it, which is awesome because I also like to play it, at least right now in the current standard. And I figured we talked about it a couple months ago, so why not, I guess a month ago, 6 weeks ago? I don't know, it was a while ago, but why not do an update? Because things changed, the meta changed, things have shaken out a little bit, and we have some interesting choices. So let's talk about them. Okay, now if you take a look at this list, it looks very similar to what was around kind of toward the end of last season. So we're not going to spend a ton of time going over the card list as much as I want to talk about why we've made the choices that we've made on this list. So right off the top, we're still playing Fervent Champ. Best one drop this deck can play in red. Same thing on the Knight of the Ebon Legion. Obviously still the best mono black deck or creature we can play, or black creature we can play in this list. Sorry about that. And then we're still playing Black Lance Paragon. It's not as good as it used to be, but because of the ability to be played as flash, it's still pretty good for this deck and allows you to keep pressure up, so we got to keep it. Stormfish Crusader, this card is one of the best cards in the deck, and I think we should never remove it. I think that's a mistake when people do that. The card is super, super, super good. Anax, definitely one of the new cards that wanted to make the list. It has a few different things here, and this is one of the cards I definitely want to talk about in the sense that it actually allows you to have extra staying power and some resiliency, I guess, against the blue-white decks. Being able to play this and then still end up with 3 or 4 creatures after they sweep the board is pretty powerful. There's also several times that Anax can be a 4 power creature and still be doing a lot of work, and that's super good for you. It also gets you an additional body if for some reason it dies, and it fills the gap a little bit between power levels because you have a lot of really small early stuff that can get pressure in, and then you have a couple of big hitters kind of to clean up the board, but you don't necessarily have a lot in that middle ground, and this sort of seals that up a little bit, which is real nice because it can get you in a situation where you can play a 1, 2, and 3 drop and then just sit on the rest of your spells, and you don't have to dedicate to the board to keep punching through. Drill bits, we went back to this. We're only playing 3. We had 4, but then I opted to make space for another Anax instead of another drill bit. That may not be the best choice. It's arguable. I would say play with it and see if you want to swap those numbers a little bit, but it's obviously still good with so many slower and control decks being in the format, and it's kind of it gives you a little bit of stretch between like turn 2 and turn 4, whereas you can still deal some damage, say with a Crusader, then maybe play a drill bit and kind of get a feel for what you should be doing the next couple turns. So that bit of information gathering that it offers you is still really, really good. Bone Crusher Giant. Believe it or not, this is the card I'm having the most kind of a love-hate relationship with right now. It's really good against the creature-based decks, but it's very mediocre against the control decks. Matter of fact, it's been one of the cards I actually side out against the control decks quite a bit because you get caught in a lot of situations where it doesn't actually kill anything in those decks, and at best, you can like shoot a Narset to keep them from drawing an additional card. You can kill a, I don't know, a Teferi with it. Like, you really are stretching for things to do with it in the blue-white control deck. Other than the fact that it can give you the option to kind of get us 2 damage and get a creature, but ultimately it's not the way you want to go most of the time. Now, conversely, against mono red, it's quite a decent card. It's a turn 2 play to be able to shoot something, which kills pretty much everything they would play by that turn, and then still give you a 4 power blocker, which is pretty strong. So, something to really consider. Depending on what your metagame's made up of, you may cut it down to 2, or if you're playing against a lot of aggro decks, maybe you go up to 3 and you cut, or go up to 4 and you cut a drill bit. That's kind of what I would look at there. Still only 2 Murderous Riders. There's an argument to be made that if you're playing against a bunch of mid-rangey decks in your meta, it's possible you want to go with a 3rd Murderous Rider. But more often than not, I'm playing it just as a 2/3 creature with lifelink, and that's fine for me. You know, I occasionally do still use it against planeswalkers, which is okay. There's been a couple of times I've had to use it against something like a Nightmare Shepherd or whatever, just to get it out of the way so we can keep fighting. So it still has some flexible uses, but being 3 mana and not necessarily putting something on the board that turn still can be a downside against some matchups, and the 2 damage from the life loss does matter, so keep that in mind. We're still playing Rotting Regisaur. Not going to walk away from this card. It's too good, too big, and as when you see our sideboard, there's some other stuff to make it a little bit better now. Went to Rankles. I had previous versions that had Nightmare Shepherd in there. I had some previous versions that also had Spawn of Mayhem in there. And now we're on Rankle. Mostly because Rankle's discard ability is actually pretty good against the slower decks. I like that aspect of it. There's sometimes even just getting that little extra damage out of it is really nice. So it's filling some different roles. Now, what I would say is if you have an extremely control-heavy meta, possibly you go with Nightmare Shepherd. Mostly because if they sweep the board, you kind of can double down with Annex and Nightmare Shepherd, and then, you know, end up with 6 or 8 creatures post-combat if that were to happen. So there's a few things going on there that I would take into consideration when you decide what creature you want in that spot. Unfortunately, right now, I think, as much as I love it, and I hate to say this, Spawn of Mayhem is actually not the card we want in that spot right now. I think just the way the format's shaped, it just doesn't line up well for the card. I'm a big fan of it. There may be a time where there's more mid-rangey, you know, Gruul type decks or something that we could play, but right now, I just don't think that's the card for us. And then, of course, a full set of Embercleaves. No surprise to anybody, because Embercleaves is absurd. Let's check out the sideboard, though. Well, looking at the lands, not much has changed here. We're still just playing 1 Castle Locthwain. We're playing a full set of Blood Crypts, and we are playing 2 Temple of Malice. And this is something that's different from the previous list. There are no more tournament grounds in the list, and that's because we've added things like Rankle that wants to make sure you have double black that you can use. Stuff like Anax that wants you to have double red. So we had to make some tough decisions in the mana, but it does help clean things up a little bit. Now, we've made some concessions in the sideboard. So red cap melee. This is obviously a concession to the mono red list. However, when you come up against other random aggro decks, sometimes you just bring this in. I've used it against the Jund list, actually, where I've used it to spot kill a goose when I've had plenty of mana in my hand. I've used it to kill a Spawn of Mayhem. I've used it for an additional 4 damage on Korvath, the dragon. So there's a few things you can do with this card. So really look at where you can bring it in. Don't just assume it's only for the straight red decks. Shadow Spear, this card has been very good. It's good against the mono red list and gives you a chance to just gain some. Usually when you bring it in, a lot of times you kind of stabilize, and then when you start getting that 1 or 2 big hits in where you're dealing 4 damage or 5 damage but gaining that life, it really changes the game significantly. If you put it on a Rotting Regisaur, it's still big. It becomes an 8/7 that tramples and has lifelink, so that's really good. You can use it in situations to get rid of a Dream Trawler, you know, get rid of their hexproof and then kill it with one of your spot removal cards. So there's a few things this card has going for it that can't be overlooked really, and it's really cheap to activate, it's cheap to cast, so it's filling quite a few spots. It's probably one of the more versatile cards out of the new set, but also very linear in what it's doing. I know that's very weird to say, those things don't sound like they line up, but trust me, it's a really good card you want to consider. And really play with it a bit to figure out when's the best time to equip and not equip in the matchups, because using that mana is very important to use it correctly. Agonizing Remorse, again, this is more of a concession against the control matchups. This gives us 6 discard spells post sideboard, but it also lets you remove stuff out of the yard. So remember, if they have something like an Elspeth that conquers death, you can get something out of the yard before they can get it into play. You can remove something like a cat if you've made them use their food somehow. You can get rid of Uros. I've done that a few times. So it has a few different uses. So kind of think outside the box a little bit on it. Epic Downfall, we're still running with. It's a fine card. You know, just look where to use it. Noxious Grass, we're playing just a couple of those. There's not as much blue-green in the format anymore, but truthfully, this deck seems to beat that fairly easily anyway. So didn't need to go deep on those. But Devil, this is a card I've always played in my Rakdos list that other people stray away from, but it really just fills a lot of holes. And now that we have all colored mana, it becomes a little easier to cast. So definitely a big fan of the card. And then Cavalier of Night, we're still using against the control decks. So when they play board sweepers, you can get something back. We're using it sometimes against the cat food decks, just as a way to have something bigger that's hard for them to fight, depending on the builds. I've also used it against the Fires of Invention decks as a way to have a bigger blocker gain some life and buy a turn or two. But also, if they do kill it, you block and kill it. Sometimes you're just getting a dinosaur back, and then that can end the game. So it's another card that has some flexibility. It does cost 5, so I've had personal battles with myself on if I really want to keep it in the list or not. But it's still there for now. But yeah, overall, you can see the list stayed mostly the same. We've mostly just adjusted numbers plus or minus a little bit. We made room for an axe, and then we also added some sideboard cards, and then changed the rankles back into the list. And overall, this has been pretty steady for us. I recently had a stretch where I went 4-1 with the deck in Arena, just kind of trying out the new changes, so I'm real happy about that. So yeah, definitely give this deck a look. If you like Rakdos, here's kind of a good mid-range update, or mid of the season update. So definitely give it a play and let me know what you think. Yeah, give it a run. Leave me some comments about it, and just tell me what you like or don't like, or what other cards you're trying out, and I will give those a look. And if you like these mid-season updates, let me know, and leave a comment below, and like and subscribe, because we need that to help grow the channel. But yeah, I'm going to try to do some more of these, so keep your eye out. See you next time.